Hello, BookTube. Yesterday I made a video in which I looked back at some books that I read in February. It was a bit of a depth gauge, a bit of a progress report on my February. My reading February is not over yet. It's very much still ongoing. And it wasn't meant to be the best of February, and it certainly wasn't meant to be the worst of February. I spared you books where I would just have ranted for an hour, even though I read a great number of those books in February. Rather, it was sort of highlights, things that have been sticking in my mind, maybe unexpectedly, things I thought might interest you. And at the end of the video, I said that if you enjoyed this kind of thing, let me know, and we'll do it again. And you let me know. I've had many, many, many emails on the subject since then of people saying this was great, this was not only interesting, but very useful. I asked my friend Deb, well, she also sent me an email and said, please do more videos like this. And there are only 2 or 3 people in the world who can simply tell me to do that, and I will say, okay. And she's one of them. And I asked her why. Why would this be so? Why would I be getting this kind of response to that particular video? And she said, well, that speaking only for herself, it was interesting and also useful. You've got a whole bunch of mini reviews that can be very useful. Another person emailed me and said, this is exactly what you did all day long at your bookstore. You weren't just talking about old-timey favorites or book themes. You were rapid fire going through books on new release tables. What do you think about the books that are right here? I don't know exactly what the reason is, but I'm in days as tense and dark as these, when the news is just unrelenting, where we're seeing a war tweeted in real time. I am perfectly happy under those circumstances to give you any amount of distraction that I can. If you're like me, it's not much distraction. If you're like me, you are saturated with that news most of the day. And how it could go worse, how it could get even worse. So if you're like me, you probably are grateful for a distraction now and again. So I thought for this video, we would do it again. We would go through a few more February books. So for this video, we'll be looking backwards at February. And then I have a couple of ideas for looking forwards from here, because March is right around the corner. We're right about to start March. So James Holder mentioned that he'd really like it if I resume TBR Be Wise, my sort of obverse video where I look ahead to the upcoming month. I don't see any reason why we can't do a look forward to March books and then a look back at March books when March is over. I don't see any reason why we can't do that. It's not like that we're going to run out of books. So I'll do that. But for today, I thought we'd continue one more video looking back at February. So I've got all the technology lined up here designed to work without failing. And we'll start with a work in translation. This is by Harold Janner, and it's Aftermath, Life in the Fallout of the Third Reich. As you can see from the subtitle there, it's not just 1945. It's a good long length of time. I don't remember off the top of my head when this came out in Germany, but I thought the translation was wonderful. I thought the book was amazing. Just amazing. Extremely bitter, depressing writing, of course. I want to stress that as if I need to. I don't think I do. This is a joyless subject. So it might not be the right thing for your mental health right at the moment. I just wanted to point it out because it is an unbelievably remarkable work. A very, very good edition. Very glad that somewhere along the line some decision was made to translate this into English. This is the personal decisions, the hard scrabble nature. Keep in mind that Berlin and other German cities were reduced to piles of rubble, with no help except what was coming from the Allies, and with the constant threat of the Russians looming over everything. So if you're a diehard German, you have a choice of enemies. It's not just those details, though. The scope broadens out politically as well and socially to broader than that. Just a remark. I've read a number of books on this subject, although none that extend past the 1940s. This is the first one that did that, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. What direction are we going to go in here? All right. Okay. Then we're going to move to fiction. To a thriller series that I can strongly, strongly recommend to you. This is Dark Horse by Greg Hurwitz. This is an Orphan X Nowhere Man novel about a former government operative who is now the Nowhere Man. He is sort of a spook for hire, a Rambo for hire, knows a lot about how mercenary work works, and has an extensive network of contacts and all sorts of I'm a man with certain talents, that sort of thing. It's that kind of a rogue operative book. So if you like that sort of thing, and you've somehow missed this series, you have quite a few of these books to go with. I was first introduced to this author not through the Orphan X books. He wrote a book called Survivor that the Washington Post asked me to review. I'd never heard of him before. I don't think I even knew him from his comic book writing. And I thought Survivor was fantastic as a thriller. Just fantastic. Never put a foot wrong. And was happy to say so in my review. And that made me, when that happens to you, you go looking for the author to see if that was a fluke or if maybe you're missing a whole bunch of books that are fantastic. And these Nowhere Man books are incredibly good. If you, for instance, oversee or advise your library's buying or your school's buying or something like that, and you know therefore that you have a large reading constituency of people who like series like this, like the Alex Cross novels or the Gray Man novels. If you know that you have a constituency like that, they're going to love these books, and they might not know about them. And this was all of Hurwitz's books are smart. They're all smarter than they need to be. No offense intended to the genre, but you know as well as I do, you can write in this guy-centered thriller genre without being Einstein. and Hurwitz always manages to throw in things that are levels of complexity that are pleasing and well done. In this case, the Nowhere Man is conscripted to help rescue the kidnapped daughter of a drug dealer. So there's all kinds of moral gray areas. The man that he is agreeing to help is not cartoon evil. He's not a cartoon bad guy. He does bad things, but he is really complex. That meshes really well with a couple of the other characters in the book. Very much recommend. Okay, then this next one needs no recommendation from me, but some of you might not have read this series, and you're never going to get a better reprint in the common mainstream market than this. This is Elric of Melniboné. I think I've recommended this series before. This is from Saga Gallery Press. This is volume 1 in the series. It has a foreword by Neil Gaiman in which he gushes, and as well he should. And these are once upon a time when, like for instance in 2014 and 15, when vicious, fascistic, censorious blue check marks on Twitter looked like they would have everything their own way, I would have said that no one would be able to reprint the Elric books because he's an albino and a weakling and a drug addict and not entirely morally uplifting. And the books can be very savage in ways that I would assume that the censors that we have put in power over us, they haven't taken it. We've given them the power to shame us, frighten us, control what we read, control what publishers publish. I would have thought back then that they just wouldn't have allowed Elric books ever to be reprinted again. But not only have they been, but this series is wonderful. It's really well done. This first volume from Gallery, from Saga Press, I guarantee you, in 10 years, it will be valuable. Not that that's any reason to get it now, but that's a reflection of how good a job is being done here. And the Elric stories and novels are very good. They have aged without a single drop. So if you are a high fantasy fan, and you somehow haven't, maybe you're a young high fantasy fan, you haven't read Elric, definitely try this first volume. Or get your library to get it. I mean, it's a new release, so they don't have to go fishing around on eBay for it. This next one that we've seen on this channel, this is by Jacob Mahangama? And this is Free Speech. This is a big, fat history of free speech that's very detailed. very wide-ranging, starts well in the past, and Pericles and Athens, moves all the way to the present day through all kinds of things, maybe a few too many things. There are quite a few inclusions here that I would say are fundamentally not issues of, or examples of a fight over free speech. But it's everything but the kitchen sink. So if you want a one-stop volume for anything that could possibly be considered an exponent or an assault on free speech, this is the volume for you. I wish it were a little bit more engagingly written. It has, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, longueurs. It has dull spots, so you just have to be ready for that. But a very valuable, comprehensive one-volume thing. Okay, then we have a book by Lori Zaleski. I think I might have shown you this book already, but I loved it, and I want to praise it to you one more time. This is Funny Farm, and this is the novel of a woman who took up her mother's dream of starting an animal sanctuary. And this is all of those stories, all of the kinds of stories that you would expect, taking in all kinds of abused or doomed or hopeless case animals of all kinds, starting out with a relatively modest brief, but then moving on to anything. When you start a thing like this, an animal sanctuary like this, word gets around. And suddenly you start being bombarded with hard luck cases where people say, I literally have no other option. I don't know where else to turn. And suddenly you find yourself taking care of animals that you didn't expect you would ever have to learn how to take care of. This book has all those stories. It has a huge amount of very touchingly rendered autobiography. And the author pays you, the reader, the compliment of including dark stories as well, stories that don't have happy endings. So this is the full range of emotions of running this, of establishing this kind of haven. The thing that you'll walk away from the book from, there'll be sad stories in here that'll stick with you for a long time, but you'll walk away from the book thinking about how much good is being done, how many lives are being saved and improved here. So if you're looking for that kind of a book, oh my, oh my. Okay, then we have a reprint. This is a Norton Critical Edition. I've shown you a lot of those on this channel before. They have a brief introduction and then a canonical work with footnotes, and then a bunch of contextual essays at the back, contemporary critical reviews, any historical groundings for that work, and then a wide range of literary criticism on that work spanning the time since it came out. And finally, Norton Critical Edition, like everybody else, has access to Hemingway. So they've come out with an edition of In Our Time. This was Hemingway's first work. It's a collection of short stories, and it reflects his meteoric rise. There came a point a century ago where all of a sudden publishers were talking about this one person. Literary tastemakers who scoured the literary magazines for various short stories of various kinds were constantly mentioning this one person. They were saying, this doesn't read like the last 150 short stories that I've read. It reads bracingly new. Something new is being tried here. Hemingway wasn't the only person to be experimenting at the time, but that started to get, word of mouth started to build. Hemingway knew it and very much wanted it to happen, very much wanted to make a huge splash with his debut collection of short stories. And this volume has that. It's wonderfully annotated. And it also includes bits and pieces that he left out of In Our Time, and tons of wonderful essays. Just great stuff. The risk that you run, the risk that you very legitimately have to worry about in Norton Critical Editions or any academic editions of anything today is, will you get diversity inclusions? Will you get forced diversity inclusions in the critical apparatus? So will the editors look at In Our Time and say, okay, we're going to reprint this because it'd be valuable in the schools, it'll make its money back right away. We have the back of the book set up for critical essays about the work, whatever it is, whether it's Hemingway or anything else. If that board of editors is saying we need X number of essays by trans people, X number of essays by black people, X number of essays by black women, X number of essays by Latina, and we don't care about the essays first. We care about the demographics first and the essays second. If your editorial board says that, you have every right to be worried about that, because of course that will result in a second-rate product. And there's very little of that here. I can think of, there's only one essay in here that I think fairly screams, I'm here because of my Twitter following or because of what I look like, rather than because of what I have to say. Only one out of the huge amount of editorial apparatus in here, I think is pretty good. So if you are a Hemingway fan, if you have read, his major novels, but never got around to this thing, what a way to do it. What a way to experience it. Just with Norton Critical Editions tend to be the greatest way to experience a work of literature, because it's all one thing. It's all in one stop, right? If you want to know what people in the 1930s and 40s thought about this book, it'll be there. You won't have to go looking for it elsewhere. If you want to know what immediate contemporaries thought of it, it'll be right there. At least a selection of it will be. Usually, with this book has an extensive bibliography, so that even if the thing you're not looking for is there, if the thing you're looking for isn't there, you can still find pointers to it. A marvelous amount of scholarship goes into these things. A whole library of Norton Critical Editions would not serve you poorly. Then we'll do a book that we've seen on this channel before. I want to mention it one more time. This is Adam Nicholson's book, Life Between the Tides. I want to make sure you can see the bean as well as the book. Which is all about life in tidal pools, in rock pools, at the shore. So the tide comes in, fills these rock pools, they develop a biome, a whole ecology of their own. Tide goes out again, and the life forms in those pools suddenly create a whole ecosystem based on the regular inundation of the tides. And they become really fascinating. Now, Adam Nicholson, he has his own shtick as a writer. He's not just a straightforward natural history writer, obviously. He has his own gimmicks, his own way of doing things, and you kind of have to be prepared for that. This is not a straight-up work of natural history. It's not as, I almost want to use the word pure, a study of tidal pool life as you could get. There have been books like that. But I believe I think that you won't mind. He is such a wonderfully readable author that the parts when he gets a little bit highfalutin in here or a little bit autobiographical, I don't think you're going to mind. I really don't. This is a wonderful keeper of a book. Isn't he, baby? Huh? Oh. Well, you can take my opinion for it. She doesn't know how to read. All right, then we have Jennifer Raff's book. This is Origin, A Genetic History of the Americas. And this is at heart about the just what it says. It's at heart a story, a book about the population of this continent from overseas, and ultimately the African origin of every single human being on Earth. What we can learn about genetic analysis in terms of determining what the waves of population access were like, what they encountered when they got here, that genetic element adds a hugely interesting factor to this book, which is a story's been told before, but I absolutely loved how this was done. And like I say, this is not a new story, but the genetic analysis adds a lot of extra shading to it. That is ongoing, and tells us a lot more than you might think. So if you're interested in popular science and paleontology, definitely a thing to request from your library and get. Okay, then we'll do another example of this. We saw The Nowhere Man, and I mentioned the Gray Man novels of Mark Greaney. And this is the latest one that came out in February, Sierra 6. These are terrifically involving novels. Again, if you are responsible for acquiring books for a school library or community library or community center of some kind, or maybe you've got a book club with a couple of recalcitrant members who just haven't liked all of the Willa Cather you've been picking in late years, you could mix things up with one of these books and you will really, really like it. This particular novel is actually I don't think that it was intended this way, but it actually works as a really good jumping on point for new readers who could go back to the first book. All of the books are in print, but this is heavy on the flashbacks. This takes you back to the Gray Man's very beginnings in his. Like the Nowhere Man, he has a very carved out paramilitary niche, and this takes you back to the current storyline in this novel grows out of one of his earliest cases. So it's a great place to sort of get your grounding on who this character is, who all the supporting characters are. Okay. This next one was a long shot for me. It's a subject that I know that I don't understand. I just kind of want to understand it, and that is cryptocurrency. I, of course, want to understand cryptocurrency. I want to understand crypto bros. And this book just came to me, and I thought, well, give it a try. It's unlikely that an author, even trying really hard, will be able to explain this to you, but they might make some headway, and boy, oh boy, this author did. The author is Laura Shin, and the book is The Kryptonians. Idealism, greed, lies, and the making of the first big cryptocurrency craze. And the craze involved here is Ethereum, a particular cryptocurrency thing, franchise, whatever you want to call it, and the man behind it, and his team, and his immediate competitors. There's a lot of personal profiles in this book. This author writes fantastically. This is the best possible job that someone could do trying to make this comprehensible to someone like me. There were moments in this book where I almost felt like I understood what was going on here. And most of the book I didn't care whether I understood or not, because the author knows perfectly well that the goal of a book like this should be to keep you reading, not necessarily to make you qualified to pass a finance exam. And this is a fantastically involving story about a man and his vision, but also about what cryptocurrency actually is. The sections of the book on what cryptocurrency actually is, a currency that is individualized and not state-sponsored and not resource-backed. It takes a lot to get your head around it if you grew up in normal, capitalism. But the sections of this book that were trying to explain that and demystify it were wonderfully done, especially since my hat's off to the author, because she had to know that most of the people who are going to want to read this book will already know that stuff. And so they're going to be impatiently tapping their toes while she tries to explain it to people like me. I think she does a wonderful balancing job. So although I know that this probably isn't in your wheelhouse of comfort any more than it is mine, I actually can recommend it as a reading experience. You will really enjoy it, believe it or not. And then we'll finish up with popular politics. I disagreed with this book on almost every page. A lot of its contentions, I think, don't make any sense in light of January 6th of 2020. But still fascinating, especially since, like a lot of books that I mentioned on this channel, there's an extra added element of enjoyment if you have lived through the history in the book. That adds something. I don't know why, I don't know whether or not it should, but a lot of you who are listening to this video have lived through this history. And the history that we're talking about is the year 2000, which is when this author claims American history went off the rails and started to become insane, started to become just fundamentally unbalanced. It's The Year That Broke America by Andrew Rice. And some of you will know who that little refugee boy is. Some of you will recognize some of the people here. You have a string of sexual molesters all over this cover, but the long subtitle is An Immigration Crisis, a Terrorist Conspiracy, The Summer of Survivor, a Ridiculous Fake Billionaire, a Fight for Florida, and the 537 votes that changed everything. And the last part of that refers to the two figures who are pointing at each other on the cover, Gore versus Bush. A presidential election that was sent to the Supreme Court and decided by people who had been given their lifelong appointments by the father of one of the people in the decision. It gets me going, even now, all this time later. And this is... I thought this book was very good. It's very enjoyable. It's a little bit on the slangy side. It's of course not... Maybe not of course. I should tell you then. It's not the big, serious study of the year 2000 or the events on either end of it, Bush v. Gore. It's not the big, serious study that really deserves. And I don't know that it makes its case that the year 2000 changed everything. I think you could easily make that case about 2001 instead, for instance, and a couple of other years. But like I mentioned, there is some extra element of enjoyment here in reading history. This is, after all, a work of history. The author, I think, would not object if I said that this was a slightly premature work of history. There's worth in those as well, but there's an added element of enjoyment out of reading a work of history that you lived through. I know this. I've experienced this many, many times, and this will give you that enjoyment even if you don't end up agreeing with the author. So there you go. That will end with a work of popular politics. So that is another look back at February. A few books in February that may be of interest to you. They were all of interest to me. I think we're going to let February lie after this video and move on to looking at March. After all, tomorrow is the last day of February. And March is looming on the horizon with a ton of gigantic BookTube activity events. So I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to email me about any of these books. And I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.